Hey.
So this is my dear brother, member of the Joji Council, Neeraj Singh. We met several years ago in sacred conversations around healing and wholeness. And I'm super grateful and excited that you've agreed to be part of Jojima's Summer of Love. This has been an exploration of the healing path, and it's in service to laying down, if you will, breadcrumbs for others to follow. I feel like when we share our stories, we create opportunities for others to see themselves in our stories and feel less shame and guilt around their stories. And so maybe we can start with that. Shame and guilt, those seem to be the two masks that people are quick to don when they are asked to tell their story. So let's just dive right into this, Neeraj. Talk to me. Talk to
Yeah,
me
great.
about your metamorphic life.
You know, First of all, I don't think I understood what shame and guilt was growing up. I really didn't have that self-awareness. And I think what I did, what I did in my teenage years and my college years, undergraduate years, I kind of shrugged it off because people were, in business were taught to be, bold and tough, and you can't show emotions, and why are you too emotional? And it was just part of parcel of being a human being. But as I kind of grew up, I'm still growing up, uh, I understood how the guilt and shame was played a narrative in my life. It played a narrative in my relationships with people. It played a narrative in opening up with partnerships. And yeah, it's a huge purveying theme with everything that we do, whether it's in our professional work, professional life, or personal life. So yeah, that's a little bit about the guilt and shame on that. And I'm still working through it. I don't think, I think this is one of those, from what I've been told in the work that we do, Edie, I think we always, there's that analogy of the onion layer, right? That we peel off one onion layer that goes to the next and the core, and then we attain moksha or nirvana, we merge with the one. I think I'm many onion layers away from that. This is the big theme of my life. I still am navigating through guilt and shame. And every single time I'm meeting a new person or I've reconnected with somebody who's old in my life, I'm like, oh wow, how do they see me back then, and have they seen me change to where I am today? And how do I show myself in a way, I don't know, that I think it comes up. I think guilt and shame always comes up in how, for me, how I present myself to people who are not my best friend,
I'm
who,
curious, Neeraj, you started off by
yeah,
saying you weren't aware of shame and guilt as a child. When did
no.
when did it become something nameable for you? When did you become self-aware that you had that underlying narrative that was driving perhaps choices you were making or relationships you were allowing? When do you think you began to really notice that you weren't living in your full authentic self and that there were these other factors at play?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that back in 2015 and into 2014, I really kind of took some steps to make small changes, and both on the physical level, right? So somatically and otherwise. And it just really kind of came out as a full crescendo by 2016 for me. Like, here's guilt and shame, here's the ancestral work, here's this, here's that. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not like, this is a lot of stuff,
So
So
ancestral, start there. So you were
yeah.
born and raised in India. Uh,
I was born and raised over here, actually. I was born in
oh,
Florida, and I
okay.
came to California when I was 4. And from 7 through 14, I was in India. And I've gone back every couple of years since, and I now kind of continuing that. Well, I kind of took a break because of, I was working and I couldn't go as often. But now I'm going back, hopefully every year. I'm getting my dual citizenship this fall. So, being Indian American citizenship. So, I don't know. But yeah, but sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I'm just like at some point, some people talk about guilt and shame as they have felt shame their whole lives. Did you
Yeah.
feel the shame or did you just not have a name for it?
I felt ashamed, but I didn't have a name for it.
There we go.
And I've also had a lot of displacement issues, right? So growing up over here in the States, I was a shy guy. I still am very shy. I'm a social introvert. People don't think I'm shy, but I really am. So, but I love people though. And so yeah, from 7 through 14, growing up in India, but coming here every summer, I mean, I was in a very, again, we're talking the Bay Area, it's very progressive, right? And then you go to a small town, it's more traditional, and in a different country, honestly. So how do you navigate that? For me, around displacement issues, around shame of not being, being maybe too American in India, right? This is back in the 90s, this pre-internet, right? So in a small town, no cable. I think we still had like the national channel or something. We had one television station back in the day. So again, like so coming from that point of view, there's always shame, but I think that I finally gave it a name about 7, 8 years ago in 2015ish, that time. And yeah, I've been working through it. I mean, I don't think I'm done by any means, but
So
let me know.
how is it playing out in your life? Give me an example of how shame has been a limiting factor.
Shame is one of those things that am I good enough, right?
Mm.
And I think that's just, for me, I've had body shame, right? As a man, we don't talk about body shame, physical shame, but I've had that my whole life.
Can you say more about that? Because men don't talk about that. Like I talk about my
yeah, I
body
mean,
shame, but you're right. Most men do not talk about that.
right. And growing up, and maybe, and I think in the past few years, that's kind of changed in the past 5, 7 years or whatever. It's kind of been coming out a bit. But yeah, I mean, growing up, that men don't talk about that. But yeah, for me, it was always about my weight. I was a bit on the heavier side. I lost 65 pounds back in 2015, so I didn't have to deal with body issues for about 5, 7 years until COVID hit. Now I've kind of gained a few pounds. I love myself, so have any more pasta. I'm watching Stanley Tucci's, Italy series. How can you not eat more pasta? Like, yeah, I gotta eat pasta and have some wine, right? So I'm embracing it more, but yeah, but that's body shame has always been there. I think it doesn't affect me as much today, body shame, but there's other shames. Are you good enough? Are you so like let's talk about professionally. Let's talk about uh, how good of a caregiver are you if you're a caregiver to your parents? How are you measuring up? Or maybe that's one way of looking at it. I don't know. There's so many different spectrums of shame, or not being good enough, that it really does play a part subliminally, at least when I'm in community. I realized. So
Hmm.
that's the whole thing. And the biggest part about this is when I go to Carmel, or Monterey, and I see people like my soul sister, my soul brother, I realize how much that's keeping me apart from really being authentically with them. There's some days when maybe I just open up 100%, but if I'm still carrying that with me by the time I get to Monterey, that's me missing out on life. That's me missing out on connection, right? So if I'm so I mean, but by the way, a little something about me when it comes to Monterey, I forget about work in general. So I try to leave that behind me. So I'm just talking about soul stuff and fun stuff. So, but if I'm still carrying that with me, you know, I forget that oneness. It kind of it goes away, and that's the problem with shame is it keeps you away from being that one, the oneness. That's I think that's the biggest thing. If we kind of work through that individually, I think we will be at more peace with ourselves and really find bliss in nirvana. And I think that's the whole ball game.
I'm wondering if you recognize yourself as having different personas. One, like when I leave where I live and I go to this other place, I'm a different person. I have a different life. Like you seem to have this compartmentalization of your work life, your social versus your spiritual. Does that fit or no?
It does, and that's not very healthy. I'm realizing I'm learning how to integrate that. So I think the past few years, I've been kind of compartmentalizing. Here's my spiritual self, here's my professional self, and I'm wondering how do I blend the two together, and that's coming out beautifully. Not beautifully, it still has its rigid moments, or
How are you doing that?
I'll let you know when I've crossed the line.
I'm wondering for somebody listening to this, I think we all have this propensity for compartmentalization and allowing certain people to see certain parts of ourselves and not other parts, and what is considered professional versus what is considered spiritual. And you and I've had this conversation about how the shift of humanity that we're witnessing is the business world is actually the greatest field of potentiality for supporting the shift, because I mean we're captive 60 hours of 40 to 60 hours a week in an environment with other people, and yet that's the place where we don't show all of ourselves. That's the place where we have the buttoned up persona, and yet the new story, we'll call it, this dimensional shift that from fear and scarcity to love and abundance, is inviting us more and more to show up fully authentic everywhere, in our work environment, in our family environment, in our social environments, in our community environments. And it's stretching our definition of what it means to be whole instead of compartmentalized. And so I'm curious, in the business world, how are you integrating that? Because I think there are a lot of people that are sort of weekend spiritual warriors, and then Monday morning rolls around and they're back at the office and they've got the buttons on and the whole persona is back on track. But I think that's creating actually more pain and struggle, because you feel like you're out of sync with your most authentic self. So how are you doing that?
Thank you. Well, I think right now what matters to me as I take on projects uh, is finding the ecosystem that's right for me. Now, not everybody is maybe privileged to be doing that. I can't speak to that yet right now, but I am very selective. I have I have a background in the wine industry. I have an MBA from Davis. So I'm utilizing all of what I've had into being more selective. So I'm but that being said, now that I'm in this position of integrating, um, it's more about being there for somebody when they're crying, right? There's some high stress situations sometimes, and if somebody cries, I literally, you know, let them cry for 2 minutes straight, put my arm around them if they let me. And so that's what happened just last month, right? Um, or sometimes I find myself maybe I'm too vulnerable. Like I'm like maybe this is too. I shouldn't be. I should have some more professional boundaries. I shouldn't be just all spiritual or vulnerable. Even though they're creating a safe container. So I'm still learning. I'm still unlearning and relearning. And this is going to probably go on for maybe a few months or couple of years until I can process what this new narrative is. We talk about shifting the narrative. What is that new narrative? And it's different for everybody. And for me, I'm learning how to be that way. I haven't arrived there yet. So I'm a work in progress, and I'll let you know when I've crossed the finish line. Then it'll start right.
I think I had this real sense the other day on one of my sessions that it is like peeling the layers of an onion back, and when we talk about going all in on ourselves, trusting fully that there is no wrong version of you, there's just the version you're willing to live into, right? And if we're doing this right, we do it until the day we die. There's more and more and more and more. I don't think we ever arrive um,
Thank you.
in this state of integrated, enlightened. Um, I think if we're doing it right, it's a self-perpetuating inquiry. And there becomes a point at which you can leave the fear of that process behind. You begin to really trust that whatever it takes to get to the next layer, and maybe we'll stay with that for a moment. There's often a recalibration of friends and priorities and social circles. And I'm wondering, have you noticed yourself shifting? My son calls it pruning his life. He's got post-COVID come out, and he's pruning people and situations. Michelle Obama, I heard an interview the other day. She says, "Yeah, when I got to the White House, there were some people I had to slow ghost." And I love that term. I was like, she goes, they couldn't come to the White House with me. They weren't ready for that level of um, expression that she was being asked to express at. And so slow ghosting meant a recalibration of relationships and time, where she spent her time, how she spent her time. And I'm wondering if you've noticed that in your own life, that pruning process, that recalibration.
Majorly. And I'm kind of surprised at how it's taken a turn since COVID. And thank you for asking that question. There's some friends from the wine industry uh, who who I reconnected with almost instantaneously, right? And it went deeper, much deeper. And I'd known them for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever. Uh, so that's, and I didn't expect that kind of, as I've gone through my metamorphosis, if you will, I'm still changing and unlearning and relearning. I didn't expect that to happen. I thought, I was done with the wine industry. Same thing, when I speak to you, I think, you know, going back to, I think you mentioned something about the metamorphosis happening, the integration happening over the course of many years. I've kind of come to a point where when I'm with you, I just let it fly because I trust you. I feel safe, right? And that's the way I'm with some of my other friends. Like I'm not going to, you know, I'm just going to trust. I think that as long as we're in safe circles, and we kind of, it goes back to my idea of belonging. Yeah, as long as I can show certain parts of myself to you and more, right? Uh, I I'm a work in progress. You will let me progress. You won't use my vulnerability against me, right?
Right.
We can talk
Right.
about all this fun stuff, but if there's no safe spaces, we can't do it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. It's just like this is who I am. I'm a work in progress. I'm not perfect. And even these days when I talk to people about projects, I kind of just come off that way. I don't have my 2 minute knees. I'm just saying, here, this is who I am. And they say, yeah, let's kind of work together. Let's figure out something. Maybe it's starting our own project. Maybe it's starting working on their projects, whatever, right? So that's kind of my life these days. And that's what's real for me. So yeah, that is a shift. That's a huge shift that the universe has brought me. And I'm still working through it. I'm like, I wasn't taught this when I was in my 20s or when I
Right.
graduated. Yeah, it's a very much rigid, to me, rigid culture. Now it's, shifted. It's more fluid.
I'm wondering if I'm in the depths of preparing to teach the Healing Bridge and the 5 movements: invitation, initiation, inquiry, integration, and inspiration. And I'm feeling into, in my own experience, that as I move through these stages of my own awakening process, there are periods of great loneliness, great
Oh, yeah.
um, isolation, and don't know where you fit anymore because you don't fit where you used to fit. You don't yet know where you're going, and so there's this this liminal space, sort of in the middle of all that, that is can be very challenging. I remember one of the first times I began to teach the healing conversation, you were there, and it was just the two of us having that conversation, and you were deeply concerned about what you were seeing in your workspaces. A lot of people go to work, come home, glued to their video games, glued to their television, and don't have a social structure, don't have a community around them. And you were very sensitive to that sort of pandemic of loneliness. And I'm wondering if you've experienced it yourself, and what you're seeing now post COVID, um, that informs a shift or not.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing this up. That's a very astute observation. And inquiry. So I've had loneliness, periods of loneliness most of my life. What I found, because I was in 2 different cultures, then I was in business culture, I didn't quite feel like I belonged. And but since it's called a spiritual awakening, I have gone through the dark, what do you call it? The
Dark
Joseph
night of the
Campbell,
soul.
yeah, the dark night of the soul, the belly of the whale, all that fun stuff. it's not a lot of fun actually. And yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, a lot of my old friendships kind of dissipated, or I didn't feel connected to. I was very lonely. Uh, these days, I'm challenging myself by being a bit of a digital nomad, so I can go to places where I feel I belong, be it Napa, Carmel, be it India, whatever, right? Maybe Oregon one day, I don't know. Because I have friends there. So to be on the road, this is a lonely journey. It's not easy. Um, so I'm finding, how do I still connect? Because a lot of my work is on Zoom and on phone calls and stuff like that. It's just like that create finding people that I click with. It's difficult. I mean, um, like a lot of people are married maybe and they have kids, and so I'm very conscious of the time I take up from them. So it
Mm.
is very much, you know, very much, I don't know, I'm still working through that. There's no clear answer, but I will say that with the time that I do have, I'm putting it, or I try to put it productively, right? So I think I mentioned in my email, like one of the things I'm finding uh in my time by myself is, how do I engage with life and not just be over here mentally? So I have my sitar. Whenever I go out or whatever, every day I'm playing sitar with a meditation, right? I'm not trying to be a musician. I mean, maybe I will be one day. I'm working out, but or I'm cooking food for myself and my community members, right? So these are all ways of connecting to the divine for me. And it's keeping it very simple and very uh, consistent. So I don't know, maybe that's a long-winded way of saying, how do you deal with loneliness? How do you find consistency in that? How do you kind of come through it? That's what I'm working through. I don't know. That's where I'm at these days.
So, all right. So you recognize this metamorphic arc in your life of before and after. And I'm always curious to hear people sort of 5 years ago, if you asked me X, I would have said this, but today I say that. Do you have a sense of a before and afterness lens of perception on something? It could be about anything. The point of the question is to engage people's curiosity about the unknown rather than being afraid of it. Moving from something to something can actually be a really beautiful experience. And I'm wondering if maybe if you have any shares around, it was a really difficult situation and I learned X, a from and a to story, a caterpillar to butterfly story.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think one thing I would say is when I was back in 2014, 2015, I think I was very certain about myself and about the world around me. I was maybe in my early 30s at the time. Um, but as I kind of opened up, I stayed curious. I was always curious, but and I really kind of learned and unlearned what it means to be from different walks of life. So, for example, early on, I started to have friends who didn't have a home, you know. Um, Literally, those were my conversations. They were war veterans. They that was their reality, and they were living on the street. So here I am, just like in awe of just doing it for years, months and years. I still keep in touch with some of them, and they're still my friends. So yeah, that's a huge reality shift of, oh my gosh, this is so different than I thought. I think what I started to do is I started to work, or I started to engage with people from different walks of life that I didn't maybe make the time to before, but I actually pursued it. It wasn't just one conversation. And that's a tough one because it made me realize what a privileged life I've had, right? It made me realize that, oh my gosh, no matter my issues, my problems, I by the way, that's my friend's pet. That's his that's his food dropping over there. Sorry about that.
We can't hear it. It's all good. It's all good.
Okay, my apologies. But yeah, I think that if you stay curiosity is great, but I think like if you stick with it, it'll take you to places that you'd never thought before. And that's, I guess, sorry, I kind of losing track of the original question, but yeah, that's something that changed. And I didn't know in the process who I was becoming, because I was here. I'm talking to people from different walks of life. Initially, it was always about networking and this and that. That's what I was taught. But like here I am talking to somebody who I have no expectations of anything in return from them, besides a beautiful
Mm.
conversation or something to learn. I mean, I wasn't even talking 90% of the time. I was just listening. And I'm just in awe of how people are reacting to me in the background. Like, why are you hanging out with this guy at Subway, right? And literally everybody, including the employees, are just staring at me. I'm just like, no, we're having this conversation, like, back off. And we talk very often. Um, and it made me realize what was the bridging thing between us. And so sometimes it's music, right? Sometimes it was food, sometimes it was, I don't know, something else, nature walks. So I really started to find those crevices, and that's where it became my more expanded self. And yeah, and in that process, I kind of learned what their wounds were, but I also understood, oh my gosh, I have my wounds of my own, so I need to heal that as well. And again, shame and guilt, that's very prevalent with veterans, and I thought at the time I didn't know that trauma was something that civilians had. I've never been in combat. The last time I heard about trauma was back in the Afghanistan war and Iraq war back in what, 2005, 2004. I was like, wait, civilians can have have post PTSD. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a huge learning process, Edie. It really was. And there's a lot of loneliness. A lot of people said, why are you behaving this way? Why are you so curious? I was like, no, I think I'm going to stick with it. I want to feel this small in the process. I'm going to stick with it. And I think we all turn to butterflies in our own right in that regard. And
I
I,
love what you said a moment ago about what's it like to have a conversation with somebody where you have zero expectation of a return on investment for your time and your energy. You're not looking to get something, you're there to have an experience through somebody else's lens, to step into somebody else's life. And in that exploration, it expands you, and you begin to look at your own life through a different lens, and in that expansion you have more curiosity. That it's sort of a self-perpetuating virtuous cycle that has its own reward, rather than looking for the immediacy of, well, this person doesn't have any value proposition in my life, why should I invest any time in them? It shows deep compassion and curiosity that has served you. And it is interesting how people will judge you for doing something that makes them feel uncomfortable, right?
right, right. Thank you. And that's something. I mean, I'm going to kind of come back to. I'm a bit neurodivergent sometimes, so I'm going to come back to this. You mentioned something about at the beginning of the conversation about how I was worried about when we had our first conversation. I was worried about the Gen Z folks, the uh, early millennial folks, about their loneliness and all that stuff. I would say I think we need to do more of that in
Mhm.
society. I think we need to sit at cafes and just pair people up without any expectations, so they can find community. Because so far, I think a lot of the world that we live in is, if it's always about work. I mean, that's very good, but not very good. But it's what it is. But you've got to also kind of get out of that. You got to, just find something with your expectation and broaden your horizon. So you don't, and as a result, you don't feel as though you make connections, and it's a safe space for you to be in. So I don't know. It kind of comes back full circle.
You know, you came through the Joji experiment, and then you came back for the Joji experience with the youth and the elders that we did back in June. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that day, putting elders and young people together. If was there juice in that for you, and what was that juice?
Well, there was juice. First of all, I was called an elder. I was like, oh my gosh, I know I have some gray hair. So yes, so thank you for that. I feel more woke as a result. I'm just playing here, but I think that's a huge thing, though, right? I mean, I think we we don't entertain the idea of multi-generational whatever um, uh, as much because I don't know, maybe it's not talked about in a positive light in our culture. But going back, that I'm a caregiver to my mom, and and I grew up in a multi-generational household in India. We had like maybe 11 people under one roof. It's a small house. So I've lived with the benefits and but also cool benefits of being in a multi-generational space. And I think that was amazing that you brought that about a month ago. And I think what I learned was I was taken by the curiosity of the younger generation and what they wanted to absorb, I guess, or hope to absorb from the older folks. And what I was also taken by, of course, you curate a very amazing group, a very the older generation were equally as curious with the younger generation, right? So I think
Yes.
there is value, there's wisdom to be gained from all of it, and but that's what community is, yeah. I mean, that is the core essence of community. I think, and you hit upon that. I loved it. I
You
haven't seen
know,
that in many circles
that
at all.
group had a follow-up. We had a movie night and we watched the movie Lottery of Birth. And it's a wonderful documentary. It's on Apple or Prime. It's free. And it speaks to this myth of separation that we have about each other. My prayer at the beginning of the Joji Elder Experience was at the end of the day that we would not see ourselves as separate generations with different lenses, that we cut through that narrative to reach the point, no, we're just all humans trying to figure this out. And like you, I was so impressed with the openness and the curiosity of the younger generation. I was equally impressed by the elders who came and sat and were just as childlike in their curiosity about, whoa, what is this like to sit with young people and hear how they feel about what's happening in the human condition, and what are their dreams and hopes, and what are their frustrations and fears. And at the end of the day, even though there was as much as, I think we had some 70-year-olds and some 20-year-olds, 50 years gap, 2 generations roughly gap, our heart's desires are the same. And age is an artificial barrier, status is an artificial barrier, ethnicity, skin color, gender expression, all of it is an artificial barrier, because at our core, we're all just landing in this human experience with this inquiry. And if we can meet each other that in that inquiry, the sum of our parts is greater than what we are individually coming together. This movement of bringing elders and youth together got some real legs that day. And I was excited to see those legs moving forward at movie night. And there's going to be more of these conversations. And what was also interesting to me was the young people saying, gosh, I wish I could have this conversation with my own parents. I wish I could have this conversation with my grandparents. And there's a roadblock there, a perceptual roadblock about how parents and children have to be with each other instead of um, I just had a beautiful conversation with one of our sisters who was there in that gathering about what's happening in the relationship with she and her daughter, who was also in that gathering. And she goes, all of a sudden, we're not mother and daughter, although that loving space will always be there. We are now two souls walking side by side on this earthly plane, supporting each other. And I think there's some real wisdom in that recognition that we don't have to show up as elders with all the answers. We can show up with elders still in touch with our own innocence, our own curiosity, our own inquiry about the human story, and meet young people who have the same inquiry and curiosity, like putting aside what we think we know to show up in this field of pure potentiality. It was such a rich experience, and it's continuing to evolve now. Having gotten that ball rolling, there are enough people involved in this Joji youth elder conversation, then I think it's something that could really begin to expand. And so you being a part of that was, like ground zero. You're part of the launch pad of that movement of Joji. And so I invited you to be part of the Joji Council. And maybe, if you don't mind, let's talk about that for a few minutes. This idea of the joy of joining in, and everybody goes, well, what are we doing? And what do we, I'll sign up, I'll help. What are we doing? And it's been the hardest part of this, holding space for this potentiality for a new story to emerge, not to pre-program the outcome. Not to say the Joji movement is going to be this. It's the joy of joining in to get humans across the planet to come together, to do good works together, to find each other in the space between certainty and guilt and shame. Like there's such a longing for us to open up to something better than where we're at now. Like I often say, we won't meet each other in peace and bliss. We'll meet each other in our disappointment for the human experience, and we'll build from there. We'll grow from that. Go. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to just share, I think that number one, two things. You are, first of all, very inspiring. In all the workshops that I've seen you, everybody is galvanized by what you said. And so I love how you are a creator for the joy of joining in. So that's number one. And I think that's very rare. And I find that to be a blessing that I'm in your circle, and you're doing that. Number two, I think that there's a lot of mutual respect, and I kind of, and I think that from that place, there is a yearning and curiosity of what does it look like, or what does it feel like to be an elated point of view, even when I'm down in the mud. How do I blossom into the lotus? And so I just want to share these two things. Like that's what that's kind of the constant theme I'm finding in the workshops. But anyways, just want to share that with you.
So
And then
so say more about that theme. So when I bring people together, I'm hoping that the alchemy of the conversation opens our minds up to possibilities that we would not have had we not come together. That it's
yes.
yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Just say yes.
Well, I just feel like so much of the work I did for 30 years in the business world had an agenda, had content, had delivery, had, and in my world, there were CPE requirements, and people had to sign off and give feedback. And it was very much a transactional space where I delivered, they received, money was exchanged, and they went off and did something. What I find myself moving into now is creating more of that catalyst alchemical experience, not attaching to an outcome, not attaching to a deliverable, not attaching to the old structure, and creating from a new place, a new way, a new offering, where we step into these conversations that are all about the potentiality of our inputs, yours, mine, somebody else's. Like, I believe that we are just starting to touch the hem of the skirt of conscious collaboration. Like, and because I come from the plant medicine world, doing CEO think tanks with medicine involved is, for me, the new frontier. It's the place where we move the economy of fear and scarcity to an economy of trust and abundance and grace for the human race. And that if we could move this economy of fear to the economy of trust, all of a sudden you've got an economic engine for shift. Our first religion on this planet was the agreement that shells had value, that coins had value, that money became our first agreed upon communal construct. And if we go back to business as an economic driver of shift, rather than looking to our political landscape as the leaders for shift, but instead engaging our economy, our collective agreements around shared value towards love and abundance, all of a sudden, I just feel like, there's a great song by Murray Kyle, and one line in it in particular, um, where the where the people lead, the leaders will follow. Where the
Mm.
people lead, the leaders will follow. Where the economy is thriving, the leaders will follow. And if the economy is thriving in an environment where people are respected and valued, and their native wisdom is part of the expansion of the organization, rather than just, we just want you to do this job in this small way, the box, my whole life has been about metrics and expanding the value proposition of unique individual expression within an organization, rather than conformity and compliance. It's about curiosity and expansion. That is part of the juice and the engine. The doesn't show up on the balance sheet. We don't put in innovative and creative markers on that balance sheet, but I think we should. And so that I'm kind of rambling here, but I know that you and I are both being called back into the business world. Like, one of the from and tos of my life was I left a 30-year career at the front of a business story and thinking I was done with that. And yet I'm being pulled back into that because, like how we started this conversation, like, instead of having these separate worlds, my work world and my spiritual world, I'm realizing that we have to find the languaging and the permission structures for us to be more vulnerable and more committed to a level of transparency and authenticity and integrity in business that lines up with our spirituality. Where does that land for you?
It lands very well. In fact, it kind of goes back to the conversations I'm having. I mean, I just had one yesterday with a CEO. She said, Neeraj, we don't put people in a box and say, hey, do accounting or do finance or marketing. Give us your skill set and we'll design a position around you. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've always, this is amazing. And she's like, now I'm like, and she's like, give me your cover letter. I'm like, I don't have a cover letter for this. Nobody's ever asked me to be my whole self. Like, I love this and that and this. I mean, I mean, this is what my gifts are, what I've done, but here's what else I can do. And especially in the nonprofit world, especially international work, my, you know, being I speak Hindi, I know some French. They do a lot of international work, so that does open a lot of doors that you wouldn't see otherwise. So it's very much giving permission to be our whole selves in this new economy that you want to work towards. We want to work towards and collaborate on, and yeah, that is the new frontier. And so I think those shifts are happening. Going back to your point about wanting to do some workshops with CEOs, think tanks to see things differently, you have it in you, and you know that. I mean, just last month when I was at the multi-generational workshop, I had this, it was a day-long thing, and I was just so blown away by, oh my gosh, this is what I've been programmed to be, because this is my usual narrative. This is how I see myself now. I remember there was a young person in the same workshop, and she said the same thing. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Edie, you've manifested this, beautiful workshop and this and that. Even though that sometimes maybe there's a limiting belief I have around some of the stuff I will be doing." She said this. I'm gonna be like, you know what? I remember this person, Edie. She did some cool things. I'm gonna kind of push to that frontier of exploring the frontier, right? Being curious. So I think you give people that permission to do that. I see you also giving permission to CEOs to do that as well, to see things differently, right? And as long as we shift our perspective and are curious, we'll emerge a better economically and better people wise. I don't know. That's just kind of my take on that.
My theory on the case of managing human capital, that's the language that we hear in the corporate world, managing human capital, units of humans doing the work, right? Like, um, my dream and hope and prayer, and I'm seeing it manifest, especially post-COVID. So many people who were kind of on the treadmill of career building through a certain way and conforming to a certain path got permission to move away, work remotely, work from a van in the middle of a national park, to live as digital nomads, as you used that term earlier, digital natives, now digital nomads. And how fascinating it's been to watch the corporate world post COVID say, okay, come back to the office, and people, oh, did I forget to tell you I moved? I found a house for, $150,000 instead of $800,000 in California. And by the way, I can't come back. And if that's a requirement of my job, see ya. And there's just so much. I, I think of it as sort of primordial imaginal buds in this time that we're in, for us to imagine ourselves coming together to create value for the world that has this beautiful me we balance of our individual expression being fully realized through business environments. Like, business is not going to go away. We still need to have commerce. We need an economic engine to it won't be based on scarcity, though. It'll be based on abundance, and it'll be encouraging people to optimize their gifts and talents rather than limit them to a very narrow band of job descriptions that we've considered that is their value proposition to the organization. And so it takes leaders who understand the messiness that we're in between the old story and the new story, and not even having a clear definition of what the new story means, but feeling that beckoning and the becoming of something more meaningful, something more rewarding for the soul to engage in. And I see you as somebody at your age and stage and position in your life as somebody who can have a real impact. I'll be gone.
Oh no,
Long after,
you're staying with me. We're oh no, you're not leaving.
well,
Judging
I'll
no,
stay
no, that's not
as
happening.
long as I'm here to stay. I'll stay. And I really feel like my role as an elder is to support the younger generations to not be afraid to let their imagination engage in this new beginning. Like, you don't have to live, eat, sleep your life away for a job. And those employers, those organizations that recognize the true value proposition of a human uh, capital, hate that word,
Yeah,
the human,
yeah.
the true cost of not engaging in the native wisdom that everybody comes, their creative juice that they have to give to this human experience. Those organizations that understand and tap into that are those that are going to take the quantum leaps into new technologies, new corporate structures, new social hive mind structures, less about climbing a corporate ladder and more about expanding a foundation of trust in the business world. It's I do see you as somebody who's going to be a big part of that.
Oh gosh, thank you. I appreciate that so much. I thank you for seeing me that way. I mean, and to be honest with you, I see you as a facilitator who opens minds up for that quantum leap. And I think that in today's world, things are changing so quick that we have to look beyond the rigidness that we've been programmed for the past 20, 30 years in business. We have to look at what's our competitive edge. And a lot of it is innovation, I think. A lot of it is our human capital, right? So really tapping into creativity, right?
Mhm.
So, and I think if you're going to just be boxed in, if you don't allow people to be creative, I think that's a big disadvantage. I think that's an opportunity lost. So thank you for creating this. I'm looking at this like beehive, image in my mind, just like cross pollination and just that's what that's what this is all about. I think, and I
You know
truly
what?
believe that.
One
Yeah.
of the most rewarding experiences in my life was running business roundtables. I had 10 of them going around the state of California, and I was part of San Jose State University's Women Entrepreneur Program, and I started their group mentoring program, which was kind of like speed mentoring. We had 20 women, all budding entrepreneurs, and they would come together once a month and they would rapid fire questions, like, this is my issue this month. And then there'd be this hive mind conversation, and what do we pull out of the hive? And that person would go home and implement something new in their business and come back and report. And somebody go, dang, I tried it and this is what happened. And somebody said, I tried it and that's what happened. And now that cross-pollinating, that excitement about coming into new ways of being and thinking, and what worked in one industry, how does that translate to another industry? And um, those were the most exciting, rewarding experiences of my business career, was watching people's light bulbs go off and get excited, and to spark that entrepreneurial edge in people. I think is where the new story is going to find its real foundation going forward, where people understand that they're not just there to create a product or a service, to master the marketing of that product or service. They're there to create an opportunity for expansion of a new story, and that has a whole different juice about it, and it's fun to watch, especially young entrepreneurial minds. Yeah, go ahead.
It is. Thank you, Edie. I think that's where the new narrative will be created, right? It already is being created. I'm seeing it in the wine industry. I'm seeing it in the nonprofit industry. I mean, the wine industry is, in my opinion, compared to tech, a traditionally stagnant industry. Nonprofit industry, I can't speak to as well, but that is also similarly the same way. But I think what I'm finding is that there are people. I'm finding people, and they're finding me, that they think differently. They want to do things differently. They want to shape their industries to be different, more holistic, right? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, where were you guys 20 years ago when I first graduated from college? I wish I could have seen you guys, but I think that's the new paradigm. And
Yeah,
I think if we can stick with that and go in that one, even that 5-degree shift in direction, we'll end up in a very different place in 5, 10 years, honestly, even a year from now. So
yeah,
and because I give the other people permission as well to make at least small changes in their business. There's maybe their regimented stagnant business, but even that small level of change affects people on a very visceral level, and that ripples out into their regular lives. So yes, I think I would say that we both are in the space of being pioneers or trying to be in that space. At least
yeah,
I myself. But that can make a ripple effect in, again, very traditional, very stagnant companies, and I think that's what we're about. I don't know. Hopefully, by the time I'm off this planet, I'll make some good changes, and yeah, I'll be having some long life,
it's an exciting time to be alive, to be in this incubative, cocoonish, coming back in touch with our core essence, primordial buds, expanding into our full expression, and watching this movement really take root in young people who are not going to get sucked into the 9 to 5 compliance treadmill life. They're rejecting that early on, and I hear people my age and older say that young people just don't work like we did. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
they're too smart for that. I said yes, yes. I think
Yes.
again, engaging with them as human beings. I think that's hugely important. I think with that, I will say being the devil's advocate, there are a lot of stories where young people expect maybe too much of the first job. So I want to put balance in that. And that's a whole conversation as well. But the way things have been done since when I was in my 20s, that shouldn't be, maybe that can be changed, and that is changing. That should be changed. So yes, I think it's a meeting of the minds on both sides. I think there's about a lot of unlearning, retraining on both sides.
Yes.
It's a conversation, it's an evolving conversation. There's no science to it yet that I see.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think we're getting there as long as we're open and curious. I think we were about a month ago at your
Yeah.
workshop.
Yeah.
First start, right?
It was the first step.
The first step.
Yeah. Oh, this has been yummy. Thank you so much for making the time today to just, ponder the universe. I feel like we really need conversations like this where we're bouncing and sparking off of each other. And I use this term code adjacency a lot, that each of us has unique codes that we are here to fully express in this human construct, in this matrix of experience that we're in. And when I meet somebody who I'm code adjacent with, like you and I are pretty code adjacent, we talk about measurement and dashboards and business, and I have a lot in common with you from that lens of perception. And it's exciting because when two people who are code adjacent come together, they truly are amplifiers of a new story. And so thank you for being an amplifier in the world.
Talk about amplifying. Whenever I talk to you, even right now, I'm lighting up like 1,000-watt bulb. I 2,000-watt bulb. I'm like, oh my gosh. This is what happens. You bring out that side of me that's excited, that's elated, that's re-energized, because yeah, and that's what makes me do what I do when I'm out in the world. Again, just yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we're going with that, but yeah, it makes me so happy to see you, and the all the fun, all the cool stuff you that these conversations allow me to do in the world that I live in. So yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm like rounding
That's
off here.
okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to another conversation another day. I love you bunches. Thank you, Neeraj.
Thank you so much, Edie. I appreciate it.